It is the year 1028, and in a stone hall at Falaise, a woman has just given birth to a boy she will call William. The castle keep is cold, the torches spit and hiss against the damp walls, and the infant has no idea that his very existence is a political catastrophe. His father, Duke Robert, will vanish on a pilgrimage and die before the boy can walk. His mother is the daughter of a tanner, not a noble, not a duchess, but a woman whose name the gossips whisper with a smirk. So the child is handed a legacy he never asked for, a duchy in chaos, a claim no one respects, and a nickname that will haunt him for decades. They will call him William the Bastard, and it is not an insult that stings. It is an insult that bites, because it threatens to take everything from him before he is old enough to hold a sword. His guardians are murdered one after another, their throats cut in the dark by rivals who smell weakness. His own household is attacked while he sleeps as a boy, and the men who should protect him are busy killing each other over the right to control him. You have heard the name William the Conqueror, the victor of Hastings, the man who remade England. But the man who will seize a kingdom is the same terrified child who learns, early and brutally, that no one is coming to save him. That is the loop we are opening here, and it is the one nobody teaches you. The textbook says, a duke invaded and won. The real story is a boy who survives assassination attempts before he can shave, who watches his mentors die one by one, who learns that power is not given. It is taken, held, and defended against men who would smile at you and then cut your throat at mass. So hold that image of the cold hall at Falaise, the crying infant, the distant clang of a smith's hammer, because everything William becomes, every castle he raises, every oath he forces men to swear, grows out of that first lesson carved into his childhood. Now let's jump ahead, because the gap between the frightened boy and the ambitious duke is where the scheming happens. William grows up in Normandy in the 1040s and 1050s, and if you imagine a peaceful duchy with contented peasants and loyal barons, you are picturing a fairy tale. Normandy at this moment is a nest of vipers. The dukes are supposed to command the counts, and the counts are supposed to obey. But in practice, every noble with a strong keep and a few hundred mailed riders considers himself a king in miniature. They raid each other's lands, burn each other's villages, and steal each other's cattle. And when the duke tries to restore order, they shrug. Here is the contradiction that defines everything. William is supposed to be the supreme lord, the man who holds Normandy together, but he is also just a teenager, surrounded by men twice his age, who remember him as the bastard child and see no reason to kneel. They test him constantly. They build castles without his permission, which in medieval terms is not just defiance. It is a slap across the face, a public announcement that his authority means nothing. One of his own cousins, a man named Guy of Burgundy, raises a rebellion while William is still young, and the young duke has to fight for his very survival against his own blood. And this is where you need to understand something about the medieval mind. A castle is not just a building. It is a statement. It is a fist slammed on the table. When a lord throws up earthworks and a wooden tower on land he does not own, he is saying, "This is mine now, and you cannot stop me." That medieval power move, building a castle just to say, "This is mine now," that's the kind of raw, petty, brilliant truth you never got in history class. Subscribe if you want to keep pulling back the curtain on the real stories behind the thrones, and drop a comment right now. What would you name your castle if you were a rebellious Norman lord claiming land that wasn't yours? William learns this lesson so deeply that it becomes his entire identity. He does not just defeat his rebellious cousin, he hunts him down, corners him, and grinds the rebellion into dust. But here is what the storybooks leave out. Winning a battle is the easy part. The hard part is what comes after. The defeated nobles do not just go home and behave. They retreat to their strongholds, bar the gates, and wait for the next opportunity to strike. And this is where William does something that changes the entire game of medieval power. Instead of simply executing the rebels and moving on, he builds his own castles right in the heart of their territory, planting his banner and his garrison in the middle of their lands like a thorn that cannot be pulled out. Remember that name, because it is the engine of everything that follows. The castle, not the sword, not the horse, not even the longbow, the castle. If you have ever wondered how a man with a shaky claim and a hated nickname could conquer an entire kingdom, the answer is not just courage or cunning. It is stone and timber and earth, shaped into fortresses that project power across the landscape. Every time William takes a region, he does not just defeat its lords in the field. He builds a fortress to hold it, staffs it with loyal men, and lets the weight of that garrison do the political work for him. At Falaise, at Caen, at Rouen, the pattern emerges: defeat, then build, then hold. It is a strategy so effective that by the time William turns his eyes toward England, Normandy is not just his duchy, it is a machine. And that machine needs fuel. This is the hidden driver, the thing the textbooks glide over because it is not as dramatic as a cavalry charge. Armies do not run on courage. They run on grain, on fodder for the horses, on iron for the horseshoes and the arrowheads and the mail. When William decides to invade England, he's not just making a bold claim. He is committing to a logistical nightmare that would break lesser men. Every ship in the invasion fleet needs to be built. Every horse needs to be transported. Every knight needs to be fed. And every single one of those requirements costs money, time, and the loyalty of men who could just as easily stay home and tend their own fields. So the question becomes, why does he do it? What makes a man risk everything he has built for a crown across the sea? The answer, as with so much medieval history, is a tangled knot of oath, blood, and bald-faced opportunism. The story goes that Edward the Confessor, the aging King of England, once promised the crown to William. Edward had grown up in Normandy, spent years in exile there, and supposedly owed favors to the Norman Duke. And William, being William, held on to that promise like a sacred relic. But promises in the 11th century are like kindling. They burn bright, but they are easily consumed by the nearest fire. When Edward dies in the winter of 1066, the English nobles do not look to Normandy. They look to Harold Godwinson, the most powerful earl in the land, a man who has already proven himself as a commander and a kingmaker. And on the day of Edward's funeral, the crown is placed on Harold's head, and William's claim evaporates like morning mist. Now, here is the moment where history splits into two versions, and the one you were taught in school is not necessarily the one that happened. The Norman story insists that Harold swore a sacred oath to support William's claim, that he willingly bound himself by a vow so holy that breaking it was not just political treachery. It was a sin that damned the soul. The English version, the one recorded in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, says no such oath was ever sworn, that Harold was anointed king by the will of the people and owed nothing to a foreign duke. You see the problem. Both sides have an interest in telling the story their way. And the truth is buried somewhere in the mud of politics and propaganda. But what matters for our purposes is not which version is true. What matters is what William believes and what he does about it. Because William does not just grieve, and he does not just complain. He builds. Remember the machine. Throughout the spring and summer of 1066, Normandy becomes a shipyard and an armory. Trees fall in the forests and become hulls. Smiths hammer iron into mail and swords and arrowheads until their arms ache. Every lord in Normandy is called upon to contribute ships, men, and supplies, and William weaves them all together with promises of land and gold in the kingdom across the water. The fleet that assembles in the harbor at Dives-sur-Mer is not an army. It is a floating fortress, a mobile castle that can project William's will across the channel, and plant it on English soil. But before a single sail can be raised, something happens that almost ends the invasion before it begins. That something isn't a Saxon army, it's the weather, refusing to bend to William's will just as the entire invasion balances on a razor's edge. You've seen him build the floating fortress. Now watch him wrestle with the storm. Subscribe to Stay with the Fleet and witness every brutal twist. And drop the word gale in the comments if you think this waiting game was the true test of Norman steel. The weather turns. The wind, which should blow from the south and carry the fleet north to England, refuses to cooperate. Day after day, week after week, the ships sit in the harbor, and the army waits. And men waiting are men who start to grumble. They have left their fields, their families, their homes. The supplies are running low. The horses are eating through the fodder. And every day the wind blows the wrong way. William's authority is tested by 1,000 small doubts. This is the part nobody dramatizes. The sheer exhausting boredom and anxiety of an army that cannot move, waiting for a wind that will not come. And then, just when everyone is ready to abandon the whole scheme, word arrives from the north that changes everything. Harold has been betrayed. Not by an Englishman, but by his own brother Tostig, who has joined forces with the Norwegian king, Harald Hardrada, a man whose name literally means hard counsel, and who has spent his life raiding, plundering, and conquering across the Baltic and the Mediterranean. The Norse army lands in northern England, and Harold has no choice but to march his exhausted, battle-weary troops north to meet them. He wins. At Stamford Bridge, Harold crushes the Norwegian invasion, killing both Tostig and Hardrada in a battle so bloody that the chronicles say a single Norwegian held the bridge against the entire English army until he was speared from below. It is a great victory. It is also the worst possible timing. Because while Harold is celebrating in the north, covered in the blood of his enemies and the mud of the battlefield, the wind finally shifts. William's fleet leaves the harbor, crosses the channel, and lands on the south coast of England, unopposed. You can almost hear the silence on that beach as the Norman knights dismount and realize there is no one to fight. Harold has stripped the south of its best troops, leaving only the Fyrd, the local peasant levy, to guard the coast. And those peasants, seeing the invasion fleet arrive, do not stand and fight. They run. They scatter to their villages and their huts, spreading the news like wildfire. The Normans have come, and the king is 100 miles away with a battered army that just fought a battle it should never have had to fight. So now you see the trap closing. Harold has two choices: march south immediately to face William, or rest and gather more forces. And here is where you need to understand the psychology of a man who has just won a great victory against overwhelming odds. Harold is riding high. He has beaten the Norwegians, killed a rival king, and proven his military genius to the entire realm. To march south and wait, to delay the confrontation until he has rebuilt his strength, would feel like cowardice. And in the 11th century, a king who looks like a coward does not stay a king for long. So Harold does the thing that everyone can see coming, and no one can stop. He marches his exhausted army south, covering nearly 200 miles in less than a fortnight, with barely a rest for his men. The march destroys them. Men fall out from exhaustion, drop their shields, leave their weapons by the side of the road. The army that reaches the hill at Hastings on the morning of October 14th is a shadow of the force that triumphed at Stamford Bridge. And William, who has had time to rest, to plan, to fortify his position, is waiting. The day begins with the Norman cavalry advancing, and Harold's men form a shield wall, a compact line of interlocked shields that has historically proven nearly impossible to break by cavalry charge. The Norman knights charge, and the shield wall holds. They charge again, and it holds. They throw spears, they shoot arrows, they press and push and scream, and the English line does not break. If you have ever wondered how a peasant army could hold off professional knights, the answer is the shield wall. Men packed shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping, spears bristling forward like a hedge of iron. The morning goes badly for William. The right wing of his army, composed of mercenaries and conscripts, breaks and flees. And in the chaos, a rumor sweeps through the Norman ranks. The Duke is dead. This is the moment that could end everything. If William is dead, the invasion is over, the army will dissolve, and the whole enterprise will collapse into the mud. But William does what great commanders do. He does not just deny the rumor, he proves it false. He pushes back his helmet so his face is visible, rides through the broken ranks, and shouts that he is alive. And then he does something that turns the entire battle around. He orders his cavalry to pursue the fleeing English, and to turn around and cut them down when they do. Because here is what the shield wall looks like from the other side. It is a solid, unbreakable formation when it is standing still. But it is stiff, clumsy, and vulnerable when it breaks apart to chase a fleeing enemy. The Normans have learned this trick, the feigned retreat, and they use it over and over through the long afternoon. They charge, they appear to run, and they lure the English out of their wall. Then they turn and slaughter the men who broke formation. This is the hidden factor that wins Hastings. And it is not a grand strategic masterstroke, but a simple, brutal piece of tactical deception used so many times that it becomes almost mechanical. By the end of the day, the shield wall has been thinned, torn, and shredded by 1,000 small miscalculations. And then the arrows come. The chronicles tell us of a storm of Norman arrows that darkens the sky, and one of them falls into the eye of Harold Godwinson, the King of England, the man who won Stamford Bridge, who marched 200 miles in 2 weeks, who stood in the shield wall all day long, falls to the ground with an arrow in his face. The story is so famous that it is stitched into the Bayeux tapestry, woven in wool and linen for the world to see. But here is the truth that the tapestry cannot show. Even after Harold falls, the English fight on. The remnants of the shield wall keep fighting until they are cut down where they stand. The battle ends not with a surrender, but with a massacre. And as night falls over the hill, the field is a carpet of dead men, horses and shattered shields, soaked in blood and rain. William is crowned King of England on Christmas Day, 1066, in Westminster Abbey. And that should be the end of the story. But it is not. Because conquering a kingdom is one thing, holding it is another. And William is about to learn that lesson the hard way. The English are not a people who fold quietly. Within months, rebellions flare up across the country. In the north, in the west, in the fenlands, where the marshes swallow armies whole. And William responds with a strategy that will define his reign and his legacy.
Simple tools,
he does not just defeat the rebels. He systematically turns England into a fortress, building castles at strategic points across the entire country until the landscape itself becomes a weapon. The castles you see in pictures are not just history. They're the evidence of an occupation. Subscribe now, so you don't miss the rest of William's brutal blueprint for holding a conquered kingdom. And in the comments, drop one word that captures what you think about those pretty monuments now. Fortress, if you'll never see them the same way again. This is the part of the story that never makes it into the romantic retellings. The castles you visit today, the towering stone keeps of the Tower of London, the white walls of Dover, the massive Motte at Norwich, are not just pretty monuments. They are instruments of occupation, built by a conqueror who understood that the only way to hold a hostile land is to litter it with fortifications that cannot be easily taken. Every castle is a statement written in stone. You may hate me, you may rebel against me, but you will never be free of me. And William does not stop. He orders castles built along the Thames at Oxford, Wallingford, and Windsor. He raises the White Tower in London, a keep so massive that it still dominates the skyline 1,000 years later. He builds at Dover to guard the coast against invaders, The bitter irony of building castles to prevent someone from doing exactly what he did. The human cost is staggering. To build the castles, he uses forced labor. To pay for them, he taxes the conquered English into poverty. And when the northern counties rise against him, he responds with something that makes even the chronicles hesitate to describe it in detail. He lays waste to the entire region, burning farms, killing livestock, and destroying the food supply so completely that the survivors are reduced to eating their own pets. And, according to some accounts, worse. The harrying of the north, they call it. The land that had been the most prosperous in England becomes a wasteland, and it stays that way for decades. The suffering is so immense that even the Domesday Book, the great survey William orders at the end of his reign, records hundreds of manors as waste, empty, ruined, worthless. And here is the final irony, the one that closes every loop we have opened. William spends his whole life building fortresses to secure his power. At Falaise, where he was born. At Caen, where he built his beloved abbey, across every mile of conquered England. He dies in 1087, not in battle, but in a small accident during a raid in France. His horse rears, he is thrown against the pommel of his saddle, and the injury kills him. The greatest castle builder of his age dies from a bruise, and after he is gone, his sons fight over his inheritance like starving dogs, tearing apart everything he built with their petty jealousies. The kingdom he held together with stone and blood and iron splits into pieces, and the Norman dynasty he founded crumbles within a generation. But the castles remain, and that is the loop that never closes. Walk up to the White Tower, run your hand along the stone, and you are touching the ambition of a man who was called a bastard from birth, who learned that the only way to keep what you have is to build something that cannot be taken. The textbooks will tell you William won the Battle of Hastings with cunning and courage, and that is true as far as it goes. But the real William is not the man on the horse in the tapestry. He is the shadow behind every fortress, the architect of every motte and keep, the hand that shaped a nation into a prison of stone. You have heard his name. Now you know what it really means. True students of the blade, those who understand that history is written in blood and timber and iron, will see those castles differently now. And somewhere in the quiet of a stone hall, a cold stone hall at Falaise, a boy is still learning that lesson.